Welcome back to the conversation in News Central Television. We now move to Zimbabwe, where the president of Zimbabwe's main opposition party, the Citizens Coalition for Change, has warned of potential violence and repression by the ruling Zanu PF party ahead of the country's upcoming elections. Nelson Chamisa, the CCC leader, has called on the international community to offer support to those fighting for change in Zimbabwe. The elections will be the second since the military takeover that ended Robert Mugabe's rule in 2017 and brought Emerson Mnangagwa to power.
Despite hopes of a new era of reform and democracy, the new government has faced criticism for crackdowns on opposition and worsening economic conditions. And Mnangagwa, nicknamed the Crocodile, is expected to run for a second term. The Electoral Commission has also been accused of redrawing constituency boundaries to benefit the ruling party, and the opposition faces a significant challenge due to the ruling party's access to state resources and media. Chamisa believes 2023 is a year of change and a victory for Zimbabwe. And now joining us for this conversation, we have Sydicks Muradzikwa, a political analyst, and Rashweat Mukundu, an African advisor at International Media Support. They will join us from Harare, Zimbabwe. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome. And I'll begin with you, Sydicks, and I'm starting with what Chamisa said. Now, he said he believes that 2023 is a year of change and victory for Zimbabwe, but yet he still talks about concerns for this election. Can you elaborate on the main concerns that Nelson Chamisa, the president of the Citizens Coalition for Change, has regarding the upcoming elections in Zimbabwe?
It is true that supposedly 2023 is supposed to be a year for change, a year of a remarkable change and monumental change in the political terrain and discourse of this country. Like Advocate Nelson Chamisa alluded to, indeed there are several concerns which is bedeviling the Zimbabweans, the political situation, our political terrain in our country, in terms of a number of factors, which includes the issues of electoral malpractices from the authorities, from the ZEC, political intimidation, and the suffocation of the political space by the ruling regime to try and retain power. So basically, he's talking about the failure by the government to accede to the reforms which the general populace of the masses are demanding in as far as our elections and the political narrative and trajectory of this country is concerned.
Thank you, Sydicks. Rashweat, what is the opposition party's fear, the Triple C, regarding the potential use of violence and repression by Zanu PF during these elections and the use of state machinery? Are these concerns legitimate, or is the CCC and opposition just crying wolf?
Well, the use of violence as a political strategy is not the exception, but the norm in Zimbabwe's politics. So the complaints and the concerns by the Triple C as the main opposition party are very legitimate in the sense that we are already seeing an increase in incidences of violence, in incidences of attacks, in incidences of the suffocation of the political space, as my colleague just said a couple of minutes back. What we have in Zimbabwe over the past electoral processes, in fact, from independence in 1980, is a systematic use of violence as a political strategy, more so in a context in which the ruling elite is not so confident of a victory, is not so confident of its delivery on their electoral promises. So what we see in Zimbabwe right now is an increase in the levels of poverty and suffering, power cuts, the collapse of key public service delivery systems such as health, and the general struggles by the majority of the people in terms of accessing the basic needs of life, be it food, be it access to health, and other such necessities. And what we know that when we have elections in such a context, the corresponding response from the ruling party is to use violence and intimidation. And we are seeing rural areas being shut down. We are seeing opposition leaders being arrested on the flimsy allegations. We are seeing even the media being stopped from covering certain areas, and journalists being beaten up when they travel to rural areas to cover political events. So these are legitimate concerns, and I think it's worse this time around because the ruling party, ZANU-PF, is not so confident of itself going into the 2023 election, and their only strategy it will be to intimidate, will be to threaten, and then under worst circumstances to kill opposition supporters.
Also talking about this opposition, Sydicks, I mean, recently we saw the release of about 26 members of the CCC. I mean, how does this put light on the political situation in Zimbabwe? There are a lot of jubilation with the fact that these people were released. Has this eased tension in Zimbabwe, or do we still have threats of attacks on oppositions presently?
Well,
sorry, I'd like Sydicks to answer that, please.
Okay, it's clear that the people of Zimbabwe, that they are jubilant, they are joyful regarding the release of the recently incarcerated people who were arrested quite recently because of a political gathering. But the general narrative or the public opinion is that the opposition forces, they should brace for more to come. A lot of political violence, a lot of intimidation, a separation of the political space is going to come. So this is just a tip of the iceberg in terms of what we are anticipating with regards to the attempts to, or what we call the deliberate attempts to thwart dissenting or alternative voices, like what my other brother alluded to. Clearly, the situation in Zimbabwe is that of separation and of trying to thwart alternative voices, and the opposition members should be very, very aware, and they should expect more to come from the regime, because the people of Zimbabwe, they know what they want, number one, and the regime knows that there is a higher chance that they are going to be booted out through electoral processes. So there is every reason for the regime to use all the tactics, all the Machiavellian tactics of politics to try to achieve or to retain political power. So actually, I can actually say this with certainty that the opposition members, the opposition political forces in our country should brace themselves for what is to come in as far as this election, which is on the current looming, is concerned.
Hey, now Rashweat, the CCC leader, Nelson Chamisa, has called on the international community to offer support to those fighting for change in Zimbabwe. And we've seen what the international community have done in the past with its sanctions regime, and ZANU-PF has used this as a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's the boogeyman. If you ask them, why is the economy in doldrums, they say it's sanctions. Why can't you provide social services? They say it's the sanctions. So in what way can the international community assist those who are trying to get a more democratic Zimbabwe without sanctions? Or do you think the sanctions are actually working?
I wouldn't say that the sanctions are working for the very reason that you mentioned, that they've become the document for the regime. They look and give excuses based on the sanctions that were imposed by the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States of America. But these sanctions are targeting individuals. We still do trade with the US. We still do trade with the European Union. We still get donor assistance from these countries in many forms. What, of course, has destroyed the economy, which we all are aware of, which is attested to by as many economic studies, is failed economic policies, nepotism, and corruption. And the international community need to continue focusing on the situation in Zimbabwe by way of insisting on the conduct of free and fair elections, by way of putting out a carrot and stick strategy, which shows the benefits of a free and fair election to the Zimbabwean government, but also the willingness of the same international community to further isolate the Zimbabwean government based on its failure to conduct a free and fair election, its use of politically motivated violence to maintain a stranglehold on power. What we mostly need is in the African countries, the African Union and the Southern Africa Development Community to use their leverage as African countries and African multilateral organizations, intergovernmental organizations, to insist on the conduct of a free and fair election. And this, to me, is what the opposition, the people see, must be insisting on. There is a limit to diplomacy, but it always serves the interest of, especially an opposition that is under pressure if the international community, if the African Union and the SADC community are maintaining an eye on what's happening, clearly indicating that the violence is unacceptable, that manipulation of electoral processes is unacceptable.
Now, Rashweat, sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to bring your attention to this. Beyond looking at the international community, the wider international community, what is happening in your zone, the SADC? Because the South Africans are saying, look, there are lots of Zimbabwean immigrants. They need to leave South Africa. What are the brother countries in the SADC region saying about the state of democracy in Zimbabwe and, of course, the African Union?
The state of democracy in Zimbabwe, in comparison to what's happening in the region in the African Union, I think it clearly demonstrates that we now are facing a democracy regression. So the failure by SADC, the failure by South Africa, as an example, to play a more influential role, a more positive role in influencing politics in Zimbabwe, is also based on the fact that South Africa itself has significantly regressed in its democracy indexes. We see the challenges that the ruling African National Congress is facing. We see a political elite in South Africa that is becoming more insular, that is becoming more focused on internal politics and facing a lot of pressures, the energy crisis, the riots that we witnessed in 2022, the pressure from the opposition for the President Cyril Ramaphosa to step down over the alleged corruption involving a theft at his farm in the Limpopo province. So what we are facing in Zimbabwe reflects the challenges that the region is facing, which is a region that is having a democracy deficit, and also an African continent that is generally having a democracy deficit. We look at what's happening in West Africa, the background from where you are in the number of coups that have taken place there. So there is a level of acceptance that there is a limit to which to what the African Union can do, but this does not stop civil society across the region from coordinating actions on demanding the respect for human rights, for democratic electoral conduct. It does not stop those countries that still have that peaceful and democratic transition, like Zambia, like Malawi, who also raise their voices in various SADC and African Union platforms, insisting on the respect of democratic processes especially around the elections.
I mean, you've taken us to look inwards to solving situations in Zimbabwe and, of course, around the region. Now, Sydicks, I want to bring it to you now. Rashweat, thank you so much, Rashweat. Now, Sydicks, I'm going to bring this to you now because we have the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, and so now we've still not heard of any date of it. And there have been accusations of delimitation of constituencies, the fact of preparation towards the election. Now, we're looking for how to have a free and fair election in Zimbabwe. Can we depend on the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to bring this for the people in Zimbabwe?
Okay, when we interrogate the constitutional role and mandate of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission as the overseer and the monitor and interlocutor of the political contestations which happens in our country, there is a lot of empirical evidence and scholarly evidence which supports the view that the conduct of ZEC with regards to conducting the elections in Zimbabwe has been questionable. It has not been free, or basically it has actually failed to deliver the credible, legitimate and free and fair elections in our country. So to say there is actually a hope for the Zimbabwean citizens or for Zimbabwe to put their trust in the conduct of ZEC with regards to elections. Clearly, there is indication that history is going to repeat itself. When we coming back to the issue which you raised in terms of the delimitation of the constituencies, clearly it also indicates that the act of unconstitutionally delimiting and the constituencies in the process, in the political process, which is normally called a gerrymandering of constituencies. These are all indications that ZEC is trying to conduct themselves in a manner that is questionable, in a manner that can actually tilt the political ground in favor of a certain political player. And opposition political members, it's that of Nelson Chamisa and other political players, which are Democrats, they have actually raised a lot of concerns, a lot of questions to petition ZEC to try and seek some answers from Ms. Priscilla Chigumba, who is the commissioner of ZEC in charge. So the fact that they are trying to act or to put other political party in terms of the advantage is a clear indication that ZEC has clearly failed to he has actually failed the legitimacy and credibility test in terms of handling and dispatching the much needed political contestation which is fair in our country. So clearly there is going to be a lot of reforms which is needed, starting from ZEC as a political institution. It's supposed to be reformed for it to be able to deliver the much needed credible and fair election in our country. As long as there are no reforms, as long as ZEC is not reformed, clearly that aspect of dreaming of having a free and fair credible election is actually a dream of a crippled child. It can never work.
If the ZEC is not reformed, what is the mindset of the people towards all of this?
Well, the people of Zimbabwe, normally they usually join hands with the civil society organization, which also try to push for these electoral reforms, try to push for transparency and accountability. So the general populace of the Zimbabwean country, they are actually concerned with the conduct of the ZEC in terms of delivering the much needed political contestation, which is devoid of violence, number one, which is also accountable to the people. So the masses of the people, they're actually much more concerned, like the international community, like the opposition, forces in our country, they are also equally, or in equal measure, they are concerned with the conduct of ZEC. They are actually pushing to petition ZEC through constitutional means so that they can reform and deliver what is best for the people and for the general citizens of the country.
Finally, Rashweat, before we wrap things up, how does the ruling ZANU-PF have a strategic advantage over the opposition in the upcoming elections, despite what we've witnessed, widespread discontent amongst the people and population of Zimbabwe? And in what ways does the opposition face significant challenges in competing with ZANU-PF during these elections?
Well, I think the error at analysis level that we often make on the Zimbabwean political space is to think that Zimbabwe is a democracy. Zimbabwe is an authoritarian regime that has rituals of democracy from time to time. The experiences of 2017, when the military moved in to remove former President Robert Mugabe, clearly showed that the power behind ZANU-PF is not the voting public or the citizens of this country, but rather it is the security structure or the securocrats, more so the military. It is the military that conducts politics in Zimbabwe, and it is the military that has a political party which is called ZANU-PF. So on that instance, we have seen the use of coercion by the military to ensure that ZANU-PF remains in power. Without the support of the military, there will be no ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF will be defeated and the ZANU-PF will be no more. So what the opposition is facing is not only a ruling party made up of civilians, but is also facing a military that backs the political party that has staked, that is at a senior military level, that has staked their fortunes, careers, their wealth, and whatever they are gaining from this system on a continuation of ZANU-PF. So we have seen in the past elections senior military officials being deployed to canvass for support for ZANU-PF. We have seen the security sector, the police, like we are seeing right now, clearly being partisan. None of the ZANU-PF members, we have promoted hate speech against the opposition, including one who called for the murder of Nelson Chamisa and his children in late 2022, have been arrested. We have not seen anyone who has attacked the opposition facing serious censure. And where there is some attempts at arresting those that have attacked the opposition, it is actually out of shame. It is out of an attempt to cover up. And it's also out of an attempt to deny the existence of the violence, like we saw a couple of weeks back in a rural area called Murewa, where very old opposition supporters, some in their 70s, were beaten up by youthful ZANU-PF supporters. And because of the shame that this brought upon ZANU-PF, ZANU-PF then denied that these were its party members. So
these are really serious allegations against the ZANU-PF, and it shows that there's still a whole lot to be done to ensure free and fair elections this 2023 in Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, we will have to draw the curtains right here. Thank you so much to Rashweat, Mukundu, and of course Sydicks, Muradzikwa, for joining us on this conversation. We will continue to put a focus on Zimbabwe elections and of course making sure that Zimbabweans have a free and fair election. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.
Yeah, very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And this is how we'll end things today on the conversation. On the first half, we dealt with situations in Tanzania where there has been corruption allegations for the director of public prosecutions. And of course, we just finished conversations in Zimbabwe where we're still bringing our searchlight in the elections. And of course, as a way forward to free and fair elections in Zimbabwe, great allegations against the ruling party, ZANU-PF, of trying to stop opposition parties from having a free consent for the elections. I am Rita Omodia to join us again next week for another edition of The Conversation.
And I'm Gbenga Aborowa. Bye-bye.